Hello everyone. So this is very different, but I cannot find that other video. Anyways, so we're going to do this video. This is the most evil mother ever, Theresa Knorr case from Killer Bites. I've never done this channel. If you're interested in podcasts, or even you can watch it on this channel. Let me Casefile 193. I'm not going to do that because it's a podcast, and I don't want to. But it's right here. Year ago. It's hour and a half long. I recommend it because you'll get much more information.
Hello all. Thanks for joining me on another episode of Killer Bites. I'm your host, Brandon.
Yes. Okay. But this case, I listened to the podcast. Oh, it's brutal. So I had to bring it to the channel. On the podcast, Casefile 193, it's going to give Susan Knorr and another woman. Those are the daughters of this woman. So I don't want to take up too much time. Let's just get into the video.
And today we're covering the case of Theresa Knorr. Theresa is a perfect example of what happens when jealousy consumes you.
I just want to say, if you're looking for something that's sweet and adorable, the most evil mother ever should tell you what you're getting into. So if you don't want to listen to this, I get it. It's going to be much easier to hear what you're going to hear than it would be if you were listening to the Casefile episode, because the Casefile gets into a lot of detail and stuff, and it's brutal.
Even when directed towards your children. Without further ado, let's jump on in. On March 14th, 1946, Theresa Jimmy Cross was born to parents James Jim Cross and Swanee Gay in Sacramento, California. Swanee had been married once before and had 2 children with her ex-husband. Their names were William and Clara. Before Theresa was brought into the world, James and Swanee had another daughter together, Rosemary. Theresa was the youngest sibling of the family, only trailing a couple of years behind Rosemary. Jim and Swanee both worked to support the family. Jim was employed at a dairy as the assistant to the head cheesemaker, while Swanee worked at a timber company. The family was doing pretty well financially, and once they felt stable enough and had plenty of money saved up, they moved to Rio Linda in Sacramento County in California. Sadly, her father's health began to decline rapidly. In the early 1950s, Jim was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. This made working nearly impossible as the disease takes over your motor system. Because of his condition, Jim's mental health took a serious hit. He was losing his everyday movement, couldn't provide for his family like he used to, and didn't have a job as an outlet. He became an angry, volatile man and took this out on his wife and children. Jim's health conditions brought the rest of the family closer together, especially Theresa and her mother Swanee. However, on March 2nd, 1961, during a grocery trip, Swanee died in her daughter's arms. She passed from congestive heart failure, affecting her heart's ability to pump blood. This was a major loss for the family, but hit Theresa particularly hard. She had lost the one person she felt comfortable with. Now, the family had no consistent income, with her father being out of work, and eventually the family home had to be sold. Theresa was a teenager and her life was incredibly up in the air. A few months after her 16th birthday, she met a man named Clifford Clyde Sanders. Clifford was 5 years older than her. Soon after their meeting, the couple was engaged, and on September 29th, 1962, the two were married. Theresa didn't see the need to stay in school, as she now had someone to provide for her, and she dropped out soon after their wedding. They moved into a small one-bedroom apartment, and soon after, the couple was expecting a baby boy. The following year, Theresa gave birth to a son, Howard Clyde. The couple's marriage, however, was not all peaches and cream. In fact, Theresa was incredibly paranoid that Clifford was engaging in numerous affairs. They would get into arguments frequently because of this. Less than 2 years after being married, things took a fatal turn. During another classic argument between Clifford and Theresa, supposedly he raised his hand to her, punching her in the face. She brought this to the attention of the police, but the charges were dropped. The next month, the two got into yet another fight. Theresa was pregnant with their second child, and their arguments continued to get worse and worse. This time, Clifford decided enough was enough, and he started out the front door. At that moment, Theresa grabbed the gun they kept in the house and shot him directly in his back. Theresa was arrested, but during her trial claimed self-defense. She testified that Clifford was a violent, abusive alcoholic. Despite multiple family members testifying against her, she was
So from my understanding, that's a little wrong. She says he came at her, I think she said he was drunk, but he came at her with a rifle, and she somehow grabbed the rifle and got it away from him, and then it went off. Now, it went off, as she says, on accident, but it went off going through his hand and into his body, which is a rifle. It's going to do that. So I don't know, the handgun and him walking away, it's a little different. Let me just say that I don't know that she's right, and I don't know that Casefile's right, but Casefile investigates things like that for a living. I'm not saying she doesn't, but I'm just pointing out a little difference there. But either way, she shot him, he died, she was acquitted.
Acquitted of this crime just a few months later. In March of 1965, Theresa gave birth to that baby girl, Sheila Gay Sanders. However, shortly after giving birth, she took up drinking and partying. Theresa was rarely in the house taking care of her children. Instead, she would hit up local bars and pubs, find men to hook up with, and would stay out till all hours of the night. Occasionally, when some of these hookups turned into casual relationships, she would leave her children with these men so she could go out and drink. She spent more time away from her children than with them. One of these men she actually ended up marrying. His name was Robert Knorr and was a member of the United States Marine Corps. The two were married in 1966 and had a child that same year named Suzanne Marlene. The newlyweds didn't have a seamless marriage by any stretch of the imagination. Once again, Theresa believed that Robert was cheating on her, seeing multiple women, and in response, the two would get into physical and verbal fights, oftentimes hurting their children in the process. While the couple only stayed together for 5 years, they had 4 children in total together. In 1967, they welcomed a boy named William Robert, and in 1968, Robert Wallace. While pregnant with their last daughter, Theresa Terry Marie, Theresa filed for divorce. After this, things started to fall further and further into a pit of abuse and neglect. Robert was adamant that he be allowed to see his children and stay in their lives, but Theresa made it impossible for him to do so. She refused to let her children have a relationship with their father or grant him visitation. Theresa began drinking even more. She started to put on weight from excessive eating, which was detrimental to her mental health and self-esteem. A year after her last daughter was born, Theresa married a man named Ronald Pulliam, but they were only together for a few years. In 1976, she married another man named Chet Harris. Both of these marriages were filled with abuse and paranoia from assumed infidelity and eventually ended in nasty divorces. After her separation from Chet, Theresa became even worse to be around. Her children were now bearing the brunt of her anger, especially her daughters Sheila and Suzanne. She was jealous.
Let me see what she says here.
That her daughters were beautiful, high-achieving girls and decided to make her insecurities their problem.
The guy Chet, she ended up divorcing him. He was the 2-year marriage. She ended up divorcing him because he formed a bond with Susan, and I don't remember the other daughter, but I think it was Susan. It could have been the other daughter, now that I think of it. But anyways, he formed a bond with one of them, got along with them really well, was helping her with any kind of situation, school and all that stuff. And she started to be able to confide in him. And this is like the first man in her life that she could trust outside of her father, who, I don't know if she couldn't trust him, but there was just so much arguing and conflict in the house. And this guy was not like that at all. He was completely different. And Theresa didn't like the fact that this man was getting along with her kids, so she ended it with him. Kind of explains a little bit.
She pulled all of her children out of school and forced them to stay at home with her. If Theresa didn't want to see anyone, nobody could see anyone. She disconnected their home phone and banned visitors from coming to their apartment in Orangevale, California, which had become a filthy, urine-scented hoarder's nest. Theresa had developed a paranoia that her ex, Chet Harris, had somehow turned her daughter Suzanne into a witch. This was followed by horrific beatings, causing Suzanne to run away. She ended up in a hospital where she came forward with abuse allegations against her mother. Sadly, they did not believe her and sent her back to live with her mother. She would beat her children, force feed them, and even threaten to kill them if they disobeyed, and force her other children to participate in the abuse. Theresa took pleasure in torturing her children. She didn't have anything going for her and felt threatened that her daughters stood a chance at happiness. She wanted to do everything in her power to make sure they couldn't succeed. And Theresa wasn't afraid to actually pull the trigger either. In 1982, after a very heated argument and an attempt to run away, Theresa pulled out a 22 caliber pistol and shot Suzanne in the chest. Somehow she survived, but the bullet was lodged in her back. Theresa wanted to make sure there wasn't any police or medical involvement, and initially just left the bullet inside of her, but nursed her back to health. After begging her to let her leave, Theresa demanded that her son, Robert, operate on his sister. They were going to remove the bullet.
So the daughter asked if the mother was drunk, and the daughter decided this is my opportunity, and she asked if she could get a one-way ticket to Alaska. The mom will never see her again. And Theresa, on this drunk thinking, said, okay, I'll buy you the ticket, but you have that bullet in you, and I can't have you going around telling people that I shot you and then having the proof. So she had the oldest son, who I think would have been like in high school. She had him be the one to do the surgery to remove the bullet. Are we picking up on how insane this woman is?
Themselves. Obviously, Robert had no medical experience, and this quickly went south. While removing the bullet from her back with a box cutter, the wound became badly infected. Soon after, Suzanne became incredibly sick and developed sepsis. Instead of getting help for her daughter, Theresa thought this was the perfect opportunity to finally get rid of Suzanne. Her skin and eyes were yellow, she was delirious, and Theresa convinced her other children that she was possessed. The only way to help her? Light her on fire to remove the demon. She covered Suzanne's mouth in duct tape and bound her hands and feet together. They stuffed any of her belongings into trash bags and loaded her into their car. Robert and William drove their sister to Squaw County, located in Fresno, dumped her and the trash bags on the side of the road. Suzanne's body was discovered the next day, but the authorities had no way to identify who it was. She was classified as Jane Doe number 4873/84. After the murder of Suzanne, Theresa turned her sights on Sheila. Theresa refused to get a job and was living off of government assistance, but it wasn't enough. She forced Sheila to enter into prostitution in order to provide for the family. Terrified, Sheila obeyed her mother's demands, scared that she would end up like Suzanne if she refused. Theresa backed off of Sheila for a little while because she was bringing in good money. However, this didn't last long. Theresa became infected with a venereal disease and decided the only person at fault was Sheila. She accused her of using the same toilet, and that's how she contracted the disease. On top of that, Theresa was convinced that Sheila was pregnant. Because of this, the abuse started again and was horrific. As a punishment, Theresa beat Sheila, hogtied her, and threw her into a small closet with zero ventilation. She left her locked inside for multiple days without food or water, refusing to let her siblings help her. Sheila died from dehydration and starvation. However, Theresa didn't realize this until 3 days later. Sheila's body started to decay. They packed her dead body into a cardboard box and dumped it along the side of the road. The body was discovered but was unable to be identified. Yet again, another one of Theresa's children was Jane Doe. The smell wouldn't leave the house, and Theresa started freaking out that it would connect her to the crime. After packing up all of her things, she forced her youngest daughter, Terry, to light the apartment on fire to get rid of any and all evidence. The fire department was called, and the flames were quickly put out, the closet still perfectly intact. Theresa moved to Las Vegas with one of her children, the only one who still spoke to her, to hide out. Terry tried to tell the police of her mother's abuse and murders, but they brushed her aside. It wasn't until she gave incredibly specific details about 2 Jane Does to America's Most Wanted that they decided to listen. The bodies were identified as Sheila and Suzanne. Theresa had fled to Salt Lake City and was in hiding, going by her maiden name, Cross. She was charged with murder, conspiring to murder, and murder by torture, and she pled not guilty to all of them. Robert and William were also arrested and charged with their involvement in their sister's murders/torture. Theresa changed her plea to guilty when she found out that Robert had consented to testify against her in order to receive a lighter sentence. She wanted to avoid capital punishment. Theresa Knorr received 2 consecutive life sentences for her crimes. And that is the end of our story. This one is so wild to me. I can't imagine what those girls had to go through, but I'm glad that she's behind bars. Thanks for joining me on another.
I recommend Casefile episode 193 on a podcast. You can just throw it on, listen to it, do something, or throw it on YouTube and just listen to it. You're going to get a lot more information, and it's going to be disgustingly uncomfortable at times. But you could also just hear this and think, yeah, I got all I need to know. And that's all I need to know. And I would totally understand that too. But I listened to that episode like 3 weeks ago, and it won't leave my mind. So I'm going to end this here. Sorry, my ear bud popped. I have a thanks button on the channel. You could donate. If you do donate, you can request videos. They go right to the top. You don't have to request anything. You can still request videos without donating. It'll just take a little bit more time. Like and subscribe. And don't give a thumbs down. If you do, you have an all-expenses-paid trip to visit Theresa Knorr on YouTube. Not me. I'm not paying for that. YouTube will. And until next time, have a good night and have a good day.